Today you will see romantic chess at its finest. In this game, Paul Morphy, the American chess prodigy from the 1800s, simply crushed his opponent. It starts off with a razor-sharp opening and it ends with an amazing mate in 8. This is a miniature to remember. He played John Schulten in New York in 1857. Schulten had white and opened with e4, e5, and what's the most romantic chess opening? The King's Gambit, of course, and that's a very aggressive opening. White wants to gain more central control by trading off black's e-pawn, and he also hopes to get play on the half-open f-file. Morphy didn't accept the gambit, however. Instead, he decided to fight fire with d5, which is called the Falkbeer counter-gambit. Black's basically saying, I don't need to be a pawn up, I just want active piece play. White took that pawn, which is the main move, and here's the point of black's play. Now that white took on d5, he can play e4. That pawn is hampering white's development, so it's harder for white to get active, and now even white's pawn on f4 also kind of limits white's play, since the f-file won't open up, and the pawn gets in the way of the queen's bishop as well. Meanwhile, black can develop very freely, and you can imagine white can easily get in trouble if he isn't precise. Now, these days, white immediately challenges black's pawn with d3, and after black defends with knight to f6, white simply trades, and white is basically a pawn up for nothing. White can even put pressure on the knight with queen to e2 and knight to c3, so really with best play, the Falkbeer is a suspicious defense for black. However, in our game, white didn't play d3, instead he developed with knight to c3, guarding his pawn on d5 and targeting black's pawn on e4. Seems logical, but let's see what happened. First, knight to f6, regaining some control over the center squares, but it also simply gets black closer to castling. Now white did go for d3 anyway, but then bishop to b4 pinned the knight, which takes white's control over e4 away again. So understandably, white unpins the knight, but now an instructive move by Morphy, e3, so he's giving a second pawn to white, and he does that simply to maintain the initiative. When you gambit a pawn in the opening, you can't play slowly, otherwise your opponent consolidates, and then you're just down material for nothing. Morphy knew that, of course, and after bishop takes, he castled. And because Schulten had to spend time taking black's pawns, you can see he's really lagging in development. Meanwhile, Morphy's king is safe, and he'll probably go rook to e8 very soon, which already threatens white's unsafe king. White now dropped the bishop back to d2, which is a good move. White would like to develop his pieces with knight to f3, but black would win material here. First, rook to e8, attacking the pinned bishop, and when the queen defends, black can take on c3, and then on d5, and the knight will take even more material next move. So bishop to d2 instead, but now simply rook e8 check, and after the bishop blocked, another instructive move by Morphy. He traded on c3, and he does that again to maintain the initiative, because if white constantly has to react to what he does, then white cannot get any play of his own. After pawn takes, bishop g4 attacks the pinned bishop a second time, and it prevents white from developing with knight to f3, because black then takes, and because of the pin, white would end up with this horrendous pawn structure. That's why c4 was played instead. White's only trump is his extra material, so at least this way he keeps the d-pawn. But now c6, another great move. The pawn is now hanging again, and if white would therefore take on c6, then black can get the knight in the game very quickly and maybe even put it on d4. So clearly black really shouldn't take on c6, but that's what he did. Much better was to first deal with the pinned bishop with h3. Black can then trade on e2 and take on d5. And after queen e7, it still looks uncomfortable for white, now having the knight pinned, but actually white can simply sidestep with the king and then castle by hand, and white actually is completely fine. However, in the game, Schulten made a big mistake by taking on c6. I really don't know why you would allow black to develop another piece with tempo, Black now has all his pieces out, one rook is already in the game and the second can join in any moment. Meanwhile, white still hasn't developed his kingside and his bishop is still pinned. Why Schulten would do this to himself, I don't know. He did try to escape the pin by moving the king to f1, but now the best part of the game is coming up. You can pause the video and try to find how black should continue and let me know in the comments if you found Morphy's move. Morphy now sacked the exchange on e2, he's keeping his initiative going, but now white also has to deal with another pin, and with knight to d4 coming up, all hope is now lost for white. Knight to d4 was played immediately, white now simply gave up the knight, and after bishop takes e2 check, went king to f2, but I did promise a mate in 8 at the beginning, and here it is. Morphy started off with knight g4 check. Now don't go king to g3, that's a very quick checkmate after knight f5 check, king to h3 and queen h4 mate. Going king to e1 also fails quickly after first a queen check from h4. g3 is the only move, and when the queen slides back, knight f3 checkmate is coming. In the game, Schulten ran to g1, and now please enjoy this checkmating sequence, which I'm sure Morphy had already seen, starting with knight f3 check, pawn takes, queen d4 check, king g2, then queen f2 check, king h3 is the only move, queen takes f3 check, king to h4, then knight to e3, threatening with queen g4 mate, so rook to g1, but then the game ended with knight f5 check, king to g5, and queen h5 mate. Now that's a classic Morphy game, simply running over his opponent without any trouble. White really misplayed the opening phase. It was clear Morphy was playing for activity by sacking a pawn, and yet white still didn't prioritize getting developed or getting his king safe. If we quickly go back, really already at this point white went wrong by going knight to c3 instead of immediately challenging black's pawn with d3. Then Morphy played this very instructive second pawn sacrifice, which ensured he kept his initiative. And at this point, white really messed up by still not addressing black's threats and even allowing Morphy to get another piece in the game. Here, rook takes e2 was also very clever, once again putting white's pieces in awkward pins. And when your opponent's king is this unsafe and all you have is active pieces, then it's very easy to sack some material and find a forced win, especially for someone like Morphy. Again, a very fine and very instructive miniature. If you also enjoyed the game, please simply leave a like. I'll make sure to cover much more interesting chess for you guys, so I'll be seeing you guys again soon, and take care.